Good morning and warm greetings to one and all. It's a glad welcome we bring to you this morning, filled with desire, hope, and dreams we all share. Department of Medicine and myself take it an immense pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar regarding the topic hypothyroidism. I bid a very warm welcome to our guest speaker, Dr. Shaktivel Sivasubramaniam, who is very kind enough to accept our invitation in spite of having a busy schedule. I wish that our guest speaker will surely enlighten us all and make us all clear of all the challenge regarding this topic. We feel honored to have you with us today. On behalf of everyone, I welcome you. It's my pleasant duty to extend a brief welcome to our Dean, Medical Superintendent, Vice Principal. They are the backbone in guiding and motivating us in all the way with full enthusiastic support. I welcome you all, sir. Next, I would give my regards and appreciation to all my colleagues of Department of Medicine, guided by our HOD, for the clear contribution in organizing this webinar. I welcome you all. We are delighted to offer the most hospitable welcome to all the HODs of other departments, teaching and non-teaching staff, junior residents, and CRI. I ensure the webinar will be profitable and we will be delighted with the expertise and knowledge of our guest speaker in every way possible. So without consuming any time, I would like to call upon our Professor Dr. Kanagaraj sir to accompany us and address the speaker.
Very good morning to everyone. Respected Dean, respected members of our hospital, respected Vice Principal of our college, and respected guest speaker, Dr. Shaktivel Subramanian, respected Dr. Senthil Nathan, our Professor of Medicine, faculty members, and other faculties from our various departments. It's a great pleasure to be in the continuing medical education program. Topic on hypothyroidism. And actually, the Department of Medicine, we continue to have a regular webinars, other CME programs that are part of CME programs. And we all know endocrinology is unlike many other disciplines of medicine, it cannot be discussed strictly on the anatomical basis. Hormones act on the entire body, and the disease of the hormones affects the entire body. And today's topic, by our eminent speaker, Dr. Shaktivel Subramanian, consultant endocrinologist, hormone clinic, Trichy, and I am very happy. Actually, I am more than happy to welcome or even to see him because he is son of my old friend Siva. Siva and myself worked in GH Trichy. Probably his father will remember me. So I am happy to see his son is in an eminent position. I really congratulate Shaktivel, and all my personal wishes will be to Shaktivel. I am happy to see you, sir. And so today I am very much sure that Dr. Shaktivel, our guest speaker, and then the guest speaker will enlighten us the challenges before us regarding this hypothyroidism, which is a very common clinical condition in our clinical practice. Whether any from the anatomy to surgeon, super specialties, this thyroid issue is very common to us actually. So I am happy. I welcome Dr. Shaktivel Subramanian and I take him to the discussion. Thank you, sir.
Now I call upon our medical superintendent to say a few words.
Good morning to all. I wholeheartedly welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Saktivel Subramaniam. He is a best friend of Dr. Sendil Nathan. Thank you, sir, for coming and in spite of your busy schedule, even though as Professor Kanagaraj sir told, it's a common topic, but it's very useful for our undergraduate and house surgeons and JRs and our budding endocrinologists by your enlightened speech. And on behalf of our chairman and our dean and our vice principal, we are not only welcoming for this CME, and also you visit here once or whenever you find time and give lecture to our students. And we are expecting postgraduate in medicine in coming years. So we are, and also I thank Professor Dr. Ramasamy and all the Department of Medicine for conducting this wonderful ECME program on hypothyroidism. Thank you, one and all. I wish this program all success. Thank you very much.
Now I call upon respected Vice Principal ma'am to say.
Good morning to all who are offline and online present for this webinar. And at this outset, I would like to thank the guest speaker, Dr. Saktivel Sivasubramaniam, who is a consultant endocrinologist from the Hormone Clinic, Trichy. And I hope he throws knowledge on various aspects of hypothyroidism. And I also thank and congratulate the Department of General Medicine for taking great efforts in bringing an eminent speaker to speak on the topic. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you. Start. Now we can speak.
Speaker time.
Thank you, one and all, for the warm introduction. And a very good morning to all of you there, and warm greetings to Sendil as well. Sendil, are we good to go?
You can start.
So let me start by sharing my slides. If the students are there, I'm told that this is basically for interns. So if students are there, I would be happy to interact with them if they have questions at the end. Are you able to see my slides? Are you able to see my slides, Sendil?
Yeah.
Okay, so the topic for today was on approach to hypothyroidism. But I wanted to give something more. I wanted to do something like what you should know about thyroid for an intern, not only about hypothyroidism, but as on thyroid as general. And therefore, I made it as a primer for thyroid, about thyroid for medical students. We'll be talking more about hypothyroidism here, but it is in general about thyroid because as you know, the interns would be going to different specialties. So we thought we'll combine all of them together. So that's the idea of this talk. And thanks for inviting me here to this August audience. And of course, it will be a privilege to come and meet you in your medical college sometime soon. For those who are on social media, well, that is my Instagram handle. If you find this talk good to you, then you can tag me in your story or mention me. And of course, I have given a lot of talks on Instagram and YouTube on hormones and thyroid, and that is my YouTube channel as well. Now, the idea of this talk is that when the student is ready to learn, the teacher appears. And thanks for having me here today to talk about thyroid, which is something very close to me, something which I do on a daily basis. But the idea here is I want to teach you not about the usual way people teach, but I want to teach about practical aspects about thyroid. And that is the reason I said the topic I wanted is what you should know about thyroid. And that is what I'm trying to do here. I'm just trying to pin myself here. All right, so this is a deep learning masterclass. Basically, I do online classes on thyroid for the general public. So this is a quick recap of the 3-day class which I do. It's called the Thyroid Deep Learning Masterclass, and that's what we're going to do right now. So the intensity of the problem is quite humongous. That 1 in 10 women, adult women, have a thyroid problem right now, and that puts around 1 billion people at risk for a thyroid problem. So it's such a big problem right now, which was not there about 20-30 years back. And yeah, we start with the basics about thyroid as to what is the thyroid. The thyroid is an endocrine gland found in the neck. It has a right lobe, left lobe, isthmus, the basic anatomy. And of course, on the posterior aspect, you have the parathyroid glands, which produce and help to maintain the calcium homeostasis. And that is why it is very important when they go for a thyroid surgery to preserve these parathyroid glands. Otherwise, the patient will land up with hypocalcemia. And it's very important after a thyroid surgery to check for calcium and albumin and do a corrected calcium. Otherwise, we'll miss this hypocalcemia. Now, having said that, the most common thing that a person will ask you in an OPD when you say that you have a thyroid problem is that thyroid na enna doctor? Like, how do you explain about thyroid to a common man from a 2nd tier or 3rd tier town? So that is what I've tried to do here. So I come from Trichy. So people who come to me come from 3rd tier cities. And when someone asks you about thyroid na enna doctor, you cannot talk about metabolism. You cannot talk thyroid is a metabolic organ. It's very difficult for them. So I devised my own strategy. In simple terms, I say thyroid is like a battery to your body. Your body is is like a phone, and thyroid is like a battery. Okay, and the different systems in your body are the apps, the different apps that you have in your phone. So unless the battery is normal, you cannot use your apps, and you have to charge the battery daily. So that's a simple way of making them understand that why do I say battery is because thyroid supplies energy. So the thyroid battery, I tell them is your battery level is low or your battery level is high, and they are able to understand and relate to it better. In other ways, I tell them the same thing as I said before, that TSH is, when you want to check about thyroid, you do a test called TSH. But however, TSH is not thyroid. TSH is a battery indicator. Like in your phone, you have an indicator. It does not mean that your battery is there. It only indicates that your battery function, how much it is there, but the battery is somewhere else. Similarly, TSH is a very good indicator of thyroid function, but TSH is not thyroid. Okay, TSH and thyroid are opposite. So that's one thing which I usually try to tell people. Okay, so having said that, I also talk about thyroid as a thermostat, basically maintaining the body temperature. The primary thermostat is in the brain, but thyroid is a secondary thermostat. So it also happens to be like a fridge. So thyroid is both a battery as well as a thermostat. Now, of course, coming to a medical talk, I need to talk to them about the negative feedback mechanism. I don't talk to them, to the public about this, but the thyroid gland basically produces T3 and T4, and T3, T4 has a negative feedback mechanism where it works on the pituitary as well as on the hypothalamus. So if the T3, T4 is going to be less, then the pituitary is going to sense it and it's going to produce more stimulation, which is called TSH. So basically TSH and thyroid are opposite. That's the first thing I wanted to inform. The second one which I wanted to tell you is the first important point I want to tell doctors is because I find it a lot of times people get confused about this. TSH is not thyroid. TSH is a good indicator of thyroid function, but TSH is not thyroid. Because people get confused. Sometimes I've seen people who have thyrotoxicosis and being started on thyroxine just because the doctor did not understand what is happening there. Okay, the opposite also happens. So first, this is the most important thing. To know the thyroid, you do a TSH. It is a very good screening test, but TSH is not a direct correlation of the thyroid function. It is an indirect one, meaning when TSH is high, your thyroid function is low. When your TSH is low, your thyroid function is high. So a high TSH means a low thyroid status, and the opposite. So what you can think about TSH is like, it's like a regulator basically. and it functions between 0.5 to 4.5 normally, or 5, depending on the value in your lab. So if the TSH is going to go low, it means your thyroid function is high. And if your TSH is high, it means your thyroid function is low. So even the public and the doctor sometimes get confused. When the TSH is high, how do you say it is hypo? Because TSH is not thyroid. T3, T4 is thyroid. So your thyroid hormones are basically T3 and T4. Now what is T3 and what is T4? Why is there T and why is there a 3? Why is there a T and why is there a 4? We'll talk about that now. As I said, the thyroid gland produces T4 and the T4 then goes into the blood. It goes to the target organs, gets into its nuclear receptor. And when it goes in, it sheds one iodine and becomes T3. So T3 is the bioactive form, whereas the most commonly available form is T4. Now, as I said, your thyroid hormones, when you do in a lab, they do something called TSH, then they do T3, T4, which is basically total T3 and total T4. Sometimes they also do something called free T3 and free T4. Free does not mean it is done free of cost. What is the difference between total and free? That is what something I wanted to inform you people. And again, the physiology of the thyroid is that on the right side, you can see a violet arrow for I minus. Basically, from the blood, the body takes iodine. The iodine goes into the cells of the thyroid and it goes into the core of the thyroid gland where it undergoes chemical reactions. And then in the presence of thyroglobulin, this iodine plus thyroglobulin forms, depending on the number of iodine molecules attached. If there are 3 iodine molecules, it produces T3. If there are 4 iodine molecules, it produces T4. So iodine is the raw product which goes in, and then within the presence of thyroglobulin, which is produced in the thyroid, it combines with it by chemical reactions to produce T3 and T4. In other words, to produce thyroid hormone T3 or T4, you need thyroglobulin. So thyroglobulin contains 2 things. One is tyrosine, an amino acid or protein, plus a globulin. Okay. Now this thyroglobulin combines with iodine and produces, depending on the number of iodine molecules attached, it becomes either T3 or T4. Now when this is transported with the binding protein. So a thyroid molecule with the binding protein is called total. So total T3 means T3 with the binding protein. Total T4 means T4 with the binding protein. I hope you got this. So the amino acid required is tyrosine. Tyrosine plus a globulin produces thyroglobulin. With iodine produces number of iodine. Depending on the number of iodine, it is either T4 or T3. Now let me take you into what is free T3 and free T4. See, I told you thyroid stimulating hormone is from the brain. It goes and stimulates the thyroid gland in the neck. The thyroid gland then takes iodine from the food. The body cannot produce iodine. You need iodine from outside. So it takes iodine from the food. It combines with an amino acid called tyrosine and a globulin to produce thyroglobulin with iodine, which then depending on the number of iodine molecules is T4 or T3. Now when this combines with the binding protein, it is total T4 and total T3. When you remove the binding protein, it's called free T4 and free T3. So the best way to check for thyroid is to do a free T4. We do not do free T3 because normally free T4 goes into the cell, loses one iodine and becomes free T3. So just doing a TSH and free T4 is sufficient in most of the people. I hope you got this. This is a very important aspect. TSH and free T4. All right. So the point I wanted to make here is that the thyroid hormone is made up of iodine. Because people ask, why are we always talking about iodine when you're talking about thyroid? Okay. Now, this is the normal, the cycle, the iodine cycle, where iodine is basically a halogen. It is produced in the depths of the seabed, where it interacts with the different types of chemicals, and then it vaporizes, and then it produces iodine oxides. These, because of sunlight, it vaporizes, goes to the clouds, precipitates, and then falls in near the seashore. So the plants which are near the seashore have more iodine. The human body cannot produce iodine. Okay, we need iodine from the sea. Okay, so this is called the iodine cycle, where iodine it interacts with bacteria in the depths of the sea, and that is how iodine is produced. And then there's a cycle. Now, if we go by this logic, then it means that if we get salt from the sea, then sea salt should be rich in iodine. But again, that is not true, because iodine being a very unstable compound, once you take the salt and tape it outside water, the iodine will vaporize. So the belief that sea salt has high content of iodine is true as long as the salt is within the water. Once you remove the salt and keep it above, it will vaporize, and therefore sea salt or the salt that we take from the sea does not contain much of iodine, although iodine was there before it was made into a salt. So this is from the FSSAI, the Food Safety Security Society of India, on why we should consume iodine and why iodized salt is important. As I said, iodine is got only from the soil, and 80% of the soil all across the globe are now deficient in iodine because of many years of agriculture and floods and all the deforestation and so on. So Indian soil is also poor in iodine. So we are at risk for iodine deficiency, especially in the heartland, in places which are not near the coastal regions, you have less iodine. Okay, so you need to take iodine as a supplement. The best way to take it is to add it to salt. Okay, so this is from FSSAI website, where they say you need 150 micrograms of iodine per day to get 100% of your daily requirement, and 5 grams of salt. They have added iodine in such a way that 5 grams of salt will contain 150 micrograms of iodine. So the best way is to get it from your salt. So what they do there is, this is called iodization of salt, where they add iodine to salt, mix it and prevent it from getting lost. Okay, so this is called salt iodization. And the main reason why they wanted to do salt iodization is because in the heartland, that is in regions which are away from the sea, people developed iodine deficiency, leading to thyroid deficiency. Now, by supplementing iodine, we are able to dramatically reduce the people who developed iodine deficiency. So this is a very common thing in social media and Instagram, Facebook, you'll find that people nowadays use a lot of Himalayan salt, pink salt, kosher salt, French salt, Sardinian salt, and so on. So the question usually asked is rock salt better? Is Himalayan salt better? Which salt is better? Well, all these salts do not have the required amount of iodine, which is 5 grams need 150 micrograms. So iodized salt is better because we need iodine for our daily functions. Of course, Himalayan salt was from the seabed. It contains other minerals also, but it does not contain a uniform amount of iodine, meaning every pinch does not have 150 micrograms of iodine. So considering the pros and cons, iodized salt is better. That is what the government also recommends. So iodized salt is the best option when you're looking at iodine supplementation. Now remember, if we eat iodized salt 1 teaspoon a day, which is 5 grams, it will provide 150 micrograms of iodine, which is sufficient for our needs on a daily basis. But not all salts come equipped with iodine. So only the salts with a clear label on the package saying iodized salt will contain adequate iodine content. Okay, so you have to look into the label. Now, the other question happens then. Okay, you said iodine is required to make thyroid hormone. So how do I know if a person has normal iodine levels or does not have iodine? How can I know if they have iodine deficiency? How to test for iodine deficiency? Well, unfortunately, even if you Google how to diagnose iodine deficiency, we can only diagnose iodine deficiency for a population, not for a particular person. We have not developed that amount of finesse and skill to check for iodine. And what we do is we check it only in urine iodine, sometimes even in serum. But this is only a rough approximate. It is useful only for a population study, not for a single person study. So right now, we have no way in saying whether one single person has iodine deficiency or not. Although we say iodine is very important, we are unable to diagnose for a single person. We can only say for a population. Now, having said that, how many of you know the meaning of the word condiment? Salts are condiments. So any idea what does that mean? What does a condiment mean? Can you put it in the chat box? I'll give you 20 seconds for that. What does a condiment mean? These are all condiments, whatever I have shown you. So I've given you a clue of condiments. So what does that mean basically? Can you type in the chat box? I'm waiting for your answers. Hello. Okay, someone has answered here. Very flavor to food. Okay, that's a good try. Well, basically a condiment is something that is added after cooking. Okay, after cooking. Meaning salt has to be added after cooking. Salt should not be added while cooking. Okay, because when you add iodized salt while cooking, in the heat, the iodine will vaporize. So ideally, when you're cooking, you should add salt at the last. After cooking, after bringing the food from the stove, after that you should add salt and then mix it. So that is how cooking should be done. So salt is a condiment, and that is why they added iodine to salt. Good try everyone. So a condiment, as they said, is a spice or a sauce or a preparation that is added to food after cooking to complement the dish. Okay, it can be an enhancer, yes, but still the most important thing is after cooking. I hope you got some new points here, because many people said this is a new learning for them. Okay. The next big question, doctor, if I have a thyroid problem, can I eat goitrogens? Can I take cauliflower, cabbage, and all these Brussels sprouts, broccoli, and all that? And what do doctors say? They say it very parrot-like. Nobody should take cauliflower, cabbage, broccoli. But the truth is far from it. There have never been studies which have shown. The reason why they say they should not take it is because these plants belong to one family, and this family has a particular chemical component which can affect the thyroid metabolism. And studies have shown that if you cook them, if you heat them, this chemical component gets destroyed, and therefore once you cook them, these can be taken. So please do not restrict your thyroid patients from eating cauliflower, your gobi Manchurian and all those things, broccoli, cabbage, whatever, just because they have a thyroid problem. They can take it provided it is cooked. Meaning, do not take raw or uncooked. That means do not take it in a salad, but you can take it once it is cooked. Okay, so I hope that I am settling this issue once and for all, that people with thyroid problem can take cauliflower, cabbage, broccoli, provided it is cooked. Okay, is that a good info for you? Now, let me take you to another point. This is from Nature Reviews 2018, as to why has this thyroid problem increased over the last 20 years after iodization has occurred. Meaning, you said most common reason was iodine deficiency. The government added the salt iodization program, then the thyroid problem should have come down. It came down drastically, but again started to increase over the last 10-15 years. What could be the reason? Well, right now we do not know the exact reason why many people get a thyroid problem, but one reason cited is that adding iodine itself could have produced thyroid antibodies leading to autoimmune thyroid problems. In that case, we have to revisit our iodization, salt iodization program itself. But looking into the pros and cons of adding iodine and not adding iodine, the people at risk of having an iodine deficiency disorder, the government decided to go ahead with adding iodine. So still now, iodized salt is considered the best choice of salt because the pros are much better than the cons. There have been many myths about iodine, like thyroid diet. There's any special diet for thyroid? No, there's no specific diet for thyroid. But if you have an insensitivity to gluten, you can avoid gluten, meaning your wheat, maize, and all that. Soy proteins can be avoided if you have thyroid problems, meaning soy proteins. And if you're taking pearl millet, you can avoid pearl millet. Other millets can be taken. Pearl millet is kambu in Tamil. So kambu mattu korachikalam. So basically gluten, soy protein, and pearl millet you can reduce. Cauliflower, cabbage you can take provided they are cooked. Now, having said all the basics about thyroid, let me take you to the next phase. Basically, when people talk about thyroid, they have an ultrasound, and the ultrasound shows thyroiditis, and then the famous Japanese word Hashimoto's. And then people are like, they go berserk about it, that what is Hashimoto's, what is thyroiditis, this has chronic thyroiditis, what should I do? So I thought, let me tell you the basics about this. Any medical problem, a person presents with the symptoms. Okay. Now, when the person comes to us, we do some evaluation, take some history, and then we try to combine the tests with the history and the evaluation to come to a diagnosis. Now, this is the normal modern medicine that we do. What we can do is something called lifestyle medicine, which is one step before, which is preventive. Any symptom, as far as endocrine is concerned, is because of some hormone change. And any hormone change is usually because of some trigger. Now, the trigger can be genetic, it can be environmental, it can be physical, it can be mental, psychological. So whatever the trigger, it is a trigger which produces the hormonal change, and it is the hormonal change which produces the symptom, right? Even for other things also, not only endocrine, for any matter, for any problem, medical problem, there has to be some trigger, right? Now, the basic funda which I want to tell you about thyroid is that a thyroid problem can occur because of a trigger. The trigger can be genetic, it can be environmental, it can be because of microorganism producing viral thyroiditis, it can be psychological stress. Whatever the trigger, what happens is that the thyroid's normal function gets breached. Okay, that is the insult. So what happens, how does the body respond to it? The host response is that it produces inflammation. You would have learned about it in pathology classes in the 3rd chapter. I think it's 3rd. When I did, it was 3rd chapter on inflammation. So the body's inflammation is the problem there. The body's defense mechanism is the problem there, because once inflammation happens, what happens is it can lead to autoantibody formation. Inflammation can produce autoantibodies because of a tweak in the immunity. Okay, inflammation can lead to a loss of function or a gain of function of an organ. Inflammation can lead to tumors which are not malignant or tumors which are malignant. So an inflammation is the reason why most of the problems occur, and the reason for the inflammation is a trigger. So the idea here is to find the trigger rather than to treat the inflammation. So going into lifestyle medicine, basically genetic, environmental, and also what we thought as only genetic is mostly epigenetic, meaning most of the genes changes are also influenced by the environment in which you live. If you are going to live a particular type of lifestyle, your genes will acclimatize according to it, and that will be transferred to your next generation. So a lot of genes can actually be changed by your environment and by your lifestyle. That's called epigenetics. This is a basic funda which I wanted to tell you about thyroid, or for that matter, any medical issue. Now let us come to the types of thyroid problems. I said I talk about hypothyroidism, but let us come in general about thyroid problems. There are only 2 types of thyroid problems. One is a problem with the function of the thyroid. The other is a problem with the structure of the thyroid. People confuse it a lot. It's very simple. When there's going to be a thyroid function disorder, it could be either a low thyroid state or a high thyroid state. So when there's a less thyroid function, which is less T3, T4, it is called hypothyroid. And as a feedback loop, the TSH will be high. The opposite is hyperthyroid. That is high thyroid function, high T3, T4, and as a feedback loop, the TSH will be suppressed. There's a subtle difference between hyperthyroidism and thyrotoxicosis. Although both mean that is high thyroid state, there's a subtle difference. Can someone tell me about this? What is hyperthyroidism and what is thyrotoxicosis? What's the difference between both? Anyone wants to try it? Between hyperthyroidism and thyrotoxicosis, is there any subtle difference? You can put it in the chat box. I'm waiting for your answers. I'll give you 10 seconds for that. Okay, I'm still waiting. A difference, whatever you think. I'm not going to give you any marks, or I'm not going to deduct any marks. So let me know about what you think. What is hyperthyroidism and what is thyrotoxicosis? Are they the same? I said they're not the same. There's a subtle difference, although both mean high thyroid state. What is that subtle difference? No, sorry, I said they are not the same. There's a subtle difference. Well, hyperthyroidism is increased thyroid function from the thyroid gland itself. That is hyperthyroidism. Okay. Thyrotoxicosis means increased thyroid T3, T4 in the blood. It could be either because of the thyroid function or it could be because of a thyroid hormone in the blood, excess of thyroid hormone in the blood because of some tablets or something. So it could be both exogenous or endogenous. And endogenous thyroid excess is called primary hyperthyroidism from the thyroid itself, thyroidism. Whereas thyrotoxicosis, it can be high levels, either endogenous or exogenous. It could be even because suppose you have hypothyroidism and you take more tablet than what is required, then it will produce thyrotoxicosis. Okay, so that's the difference. Okay, I hope you're able to appreciate that. Okay, I'll share my screen again. Okay, I said there are two types of thyroid problems. One is a problem with the function, the other is a problem with the structure. Okay, when you talk about thyroid structure, there are only three types of problems that can happen. One is goiter, meaning a uniform swelling of the thyroid is called goiter, a uniform swelling. A nodule is a focal swelling. If the nodule is filled with solid tissue, it is called nodule. If there is a swelling filled with liquid tissue, it is called a cyst. So a focal swelling solid is called nodule. A focal swelling liquid is called cyst. Whereas a diffuse swelling is called goiter. Fine. And goiters are usually non-malignant. And goiter can be influenced by your TSH value. Whereas nodules can be malignant, they are not influenced by a TSH value. Cyst is also not influenced by a TSH value, but this cyst is usually not malignant. So it is a nodule which is sometimes dangerous. Did you get that point? Yes? Can you type yes in the chat box, please? Yes, yes. All right. I'm still finding it difficult to bring people into the conversation. I want more and more of you to get into this because I've spent a lot of time to make it simplified for you. All right. So let me take you to the next thing. So as I said, thyroid problems are of two types. Problem with the function, problem with the structure. Function can be low function, which is hypo, high function, which is hyper. Where we look into low function means low T3, T4. High function means high T3, T4, not TSH. Now, when you're talking about structure, as I said, it could be a goiter, a nodule, or a cyst. So when there's a structural abnormality, you have to see whether it's diffuse goiter or whether it's focal, nodule or cyst, whether it is solid filled or fluid filled. That's it, very simple. These are the types of thyroid problems that one can have. So depending on this, they have different symptoms. Some people come with a problem with the function, which is hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. Some people come with a problem with the structure, which is thyroid nodule. And when the nodule is checked, it can be cancerous sometimes. Or some people come with a diffuse swelling, which is called a goiter. So these are the different symptoms with which people present to us. Now, what causes this thyroid problem? I said there should be a trigger and all that. So most common things are, it could be from birth. Congenital thyroid problems can be there because the genes of production of the thyroid gland is not proper. So they have a congenital thyroid problem. Some people have a thyroid surgery and therefore the thyroid has been removed physically. Therefore they have a low thyroid state. These are very common. But what is most common nowadays is something called autoimmune thyroid problems. And the most common reason for autoimmunity, I said, is inflammation. So remember I said about inflammation from pathology. That's the most common reason. Inflammation can produce autoantibodies. So what happened to this iodine deficiency? As I said, we have added iodine to salt and therefore this problem does not exist anymore. We do not have iodine deficiency. Right now, almost 75 to 94% of Indian household use iodine salt. So iodine deficiency is now not a big problem. Although it could be in some pockets, but usually not a problem. The problem now is autoimmune thyroid problems. So the most common cause of a thyroid problem is inflammation of the thyroid, which is the body's response to some insult. Okay, and inflammation can lead to autoimmunity, leading to thyroid or antibodies, proteins against the thyroid, which can then destroy the thyroid. Right? So now our focus should not be on the autoimmunity. Our focus should be on the inflammation and what is the trigger for the inflammation. But unfortunately, right now, what we are doing is only replacing whatever has been lost. We are not looking into what is the actual cause which caused the trigger. As I said, it's a yin and a yang between inflammation and autoimmunity. Inflammation can lead to autoimmunity. Autoimmunity will again lead to inflammation. Okay, so it's a yin and yang situation here. So the causes of autoimmunity, as I said, could be sometimes genetic. It could be because of the immune system dysfunction. It could be environmental. It could be hormonal. Only these four. Okay, and these can lead to autoimmunity. All right. So let us now come to your famous Japanese word Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So I'm just splitting it. Thyroiditis means inflammation of the thyroid. If it is because of autoimmunity, then it is called Hashimoto's. So inflammation of the thyroid due to an autoimmune cause is called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Now Hashimoto's thyroiditis inflammation can lead to either loss of function, which is called hypothyroidism, or a gain of function, which is called hyperthyroidism. Because the antibody can be either a blocking antibody producing loss of function, or it could be a stimulating antibody producing a gain of function. Okay, it does not always mean that autoimmunity means you will have only loss of function. You can also have gain of function. So you can have Hashitoxicosis or Hashi-hypothyroidism. So basically Hashi is autoimmune inflammation of the thyroid. Okay, now the next most important question is, why is it more common in women only? Well, because only women reproduce. Because what happens is that the women's immunity is a little bit different from men's, because their immunity undergoes some suppression during pregnancy because the foreign body has to develop. Okay, the fetus is a foreign body which has to develop. Therefore, there's a suppression of the immunity during pregnancy. But after delivery, what happens when the immunity comes back with a bang? It can produce a lot of inflammation and autoimmunity, and that is why a lot of women develop thyroid problems just after pregnancy. Could be a postpartum thyroiditis, a postpartum autoimmune problems are very common. Okay, so women are more common for autoimmune problems because their immune functions are a bit different. Their genetics, their hormonal milieu is quite different. So always, when you have a person who comes to you for a test, always test the thyroid function first, then the thyroid structure. So don't go for, just because a person has a nodule, immediately don't go for a scan alone without doing a function. Because sometimes if there's a function problem, correcting the function can reduce the structure. But if you have a structural problem, without knowing the function, you cannot go for a structural problem correction. So whenever there's a problem, always do the thyroid function first, then the structure. This is a very important point. Okay, now having said that, okay, you've decided, or the person has come to you, they have some symptoms, you want to check for thyroid, you want to do the thyroid function test. Okay, now which thyroid function test to do? As I said, TSH is the best screening test, but usually we don't do TSH alone, we do TSH with T3, T4, which is basically total T3, T4. But what is better is TSH and free T4, if that is possible. And if you think it is hypothyroidism, to know the cause, you can check for antibodies, because Hashimoto's is autoimmune. Therefore, if there are antibodies present, it means autoimmune hypothyroidism, which is, then it seals the diagnosis of Hashimoto's. So we can do an antibody test called TPO. TPO means thyroid peroxidase antibody test. So these are the common tests that we do when we're suspecting a thyroid problem. So the first step would be always to do a blood test of TSH and free T4. Only TSH and free T4. Don't bother about antibodies now. If the person has hypothyroidism, then we'll evaluate for antibodies, not in the first visit itself. Now, when do we do the thyroid blood test? There are a lot of confusions about this. Thyroid test has to be done early, empty stomach. Okay, in the morning, empty stomach, preferably before 10 o'clock. Preferably empty stomach. Okay. Now, a lot of people, what happens is they are stopping the medication 5 days before, 10 days before, 2 weeks before. Do not stop the thyroid medication if you're on thyroid medication. On the day of checking alone, don't take the tablet. On the day of checking, first do the blood test, then take the tablet. But previous day, please take the tablet. Okay, so do not stop the medication just to check. It will lead to falsely changes in the TSH and T3, T4. Now, this is the normal diurnal variation of TSH. Why should we do it in the morning time? Why not in the evening time? Because when you do TSH in the evening time, sometimes you can falsely get a normal TSH value because TSH has a diurnal variation. It is high in the night time and early morning and low in the mid-afternoon. So if you're going to check a thyroid function in the mid-afternoon or mid-evening, it might come normal, although you have a thyroid problem. So it is better to do it in the morning, preferably morning 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. And the second thing is your sleep is very important. If you have not slept properly and if you check your thyroid function next day, it can come as normal, although you have a thyroid problem. Because the normal elevation in the night time does not happen if there is a lack of sleep. So if you want to do a thyroid test, you have to have slept properly the previous night. Then next day morning, you have to do the blood test. Otherwise, you will miss a thyroid problem. You will think it is normal. And why should we do it in the fasting state? Why not after food? Well, this is a paper from Ramachandra Medical College, Chennai, where they looked into whether taking food will interfere with the thyroid function. And they said, yes, it interferes. And therefore, they said that for clinical importance, sometimes what happens if you're not going to do it in the fasting state, you might falsely get a person as TSH normal, although TSH was slightly elevated. So there can be falsely normal people. Therefore, better to do a thyroid function test in the morning, empty stomach. So among all the tests which are available for thyroid function, I would suggest TSH and free T4, fasting, empty stomach. Fasting means 8 hours of fasting. Is that clear? Now let me take you into the next one, which I said autoimmunity, we do an antibody. Now, as I said, the antibody for hypothyroidism is different. The antibody for hyperthyroidism, I said in Hashimoto's, you can have both hypo and hyper. So that is Hashimoto related hypo-hyper. But the most common hyper is not Hashimoto related. It is something else because of another antibody. And that type of antibody positive hyperthyroidism is called Graves' thyrotoxicosis. So the antibodies which you check for Hashimoto is called TPO, whereas for Graves' hyperthyroidism, we do an antibody called TSH receptor antibody called TRAB, TSH receptor antibody. So this is the Japanese surgeon, Hakaru Hashimoto, who found in 1912 that he found that thyroid disorders are because of some autoimmunity. Okay. And therefore it was named after this surgeon, Hashimoto. As I said, thyroid antibodies could be because of antibodies for the hypothyroidism, where we do TPO antibody for Hashimoto. We also do thyroglobulin antibody sometimes for hypothyroidism. But for hyperthyroidism, we do only TSH receptor antibody to say whether it is Graves' disease. Grave is the name of a person. There is nothing grave about the disease. It is the name of the person. So autoimmune thyroid spectrum, you can have either hypothyroidism, where Hashimoto is very common, or hyperthyroidism. The most common autoimmune hyperthyroidism is not Hashimoto's hyperthyroidism, it is Graves' hyperthyroidism. And for Graves, the antibody we check is called TSH receptor antibody or TRAB. For Hashimoto's, what we check is TPO antibody most of the times. Rarely thyroglobulin can also be positive. So this is about antibodies, to know whether it is autoimmune or not. And when you are checking your thyroid test, make sure that the TSH is done not in the lab which you like, not in the lab or a lab technician who is good to you, but depending on the method by which it is done, the assay by which it is done. So for thyroid function test, the best assay right now, although the best gold standard is different, what you do in your day-to-day practice is called CLIA method, chemiluminescence immunoassay method, CLIA. So TSH, T3, T4 should be done by CLIA method. It's also called electrochemiluminescence. So it's called ECLIA, ECLIA. So please do thyroid function by ECLIA method, which is electrochemiluminescence immunoassay method. And for antibodies, we do it through the ELISA method. Okay, so the method is very important. Why should we do antibodies in the first place? Antibodies are required to come to a diagnosis that it's an autoimmune problem. And second is, especially when they're planning for pregnancy, if it is going to be an autoimmune thyroid problem, then the treatment is more aggressive. So that is the significance why we need to do an antibody. So I said, when you're doing a thyroid function test, these are things you have to consider. Whom to test? Well, whom to test for thyroid is a very important thing. Anybody with a symptom, anybody, and the symptoms are very non-specific: weight gain, hair fall, dry skin, irregular periods, feeling tired, feeling low, depressed, any symptom which they think could be because of thyroid, please check thyroid, because it's difficult for you to go clinically unless you check it. Unless it is very gross, it is difficult to find out for subclinical hypothyroidism. Now, what to test is TSH and free T4. Why to test is to, as I said, to pick it up early. When to test is in the morning, empty stomach, early morning, empty stomach, and antibodies if you think it's an autoimmune etiology. So fasting preferred, if not at least daytime, not in the afternoon. On the day of checking, check it without taking thyroxine. The tablet for hypothyroidism which we take, thyroxine, is actually T4. So on the day of checking, if you take T4 and then take your blood, your T4 levels will be high. So first take the blood, then take your T4. Okay. During pregnancy, because of increase in HCG, your total T4 can be falsely elevated. A lot of times gynecologists refer patients because total T4 is elevated. This false elevation is because of HCG, okay, which increases during pregnancy. So during pregnancy, the T3, T4 values are slightly different. Okay, that is something you should know. And the method I said to do thyroid function is called CLIA, CLIA method, chemiluminescence immunoassay method. The method to do antibody is called ELISA. So these are certain things about the lab that you should know. When you talk about structural problems, especially if it's goiter, there's nothing much you can do about it, except maybe, as I said, reducing food substances which can have an effect on the thyroid function. But if it is a nodule, as I said, it can be cancerous sometimes. So it's very important to evaluate the nodule. Okay, so a nodule can be a single place nodule or can be multiple nodules. This is something, this is a lady called Iga Sigielko this is photos from the British Thyroid Society, where to increase thyroid awareness, she developed something called a neck selfie. So if you people think that if you have a swelling, the best method to check it is do an ultrasound. But just to rule it out or screen it out, what you can do is to take a neck selfie, and if needed, you can send it to me on Instagram. I will see what best can be done. So neck selfie is done by keeping your phone just in front of you, move up, swallow, and then take a selfie and send it to me. So that's the neck selfie. This is basically about to create awareness, but the best method to know whether there's a nodule or any swelling is to do an ultrasound thyroid. Is that okay? The neck selfie. As I said, the gold standard for thyroid is not CT scan. CT scan is only to see the extent if there is a retrosternal goiter. But to know about the thyroid structure, the best one is ultrasound, not CT scan. And in ultrasound, please, when you ask people to undergo ultrasound, do not allow them to get a report where it is very vague. Ask them that you want a report with the TIRAD score. What is TIRADS? TIRADS is a score which is a uniform score for thyroid nodules. Okay, so thyroid imaging, reporting, and data system score. So whenever you write ultrasound thyroid, ask for TIRAD score. That is very important. What is TIRAD score? TIRAD score is looking into the nodule based on 5 aspects: shape, composition, echogenicity, calcifications, and so on, and also taller or wider, and then coming on a score and deciding whether this nodule could be cancerous or not. So if the score is high, then there's a higher chance of it being cancerous. If the score is low, then it could not be cancerous. So it's very important to get a TIRAD score when you're doing an ultrasound thyroid. Similarly, if there is a, say, TIRAD score 4 or 5, it's suspicious of thyroid cancer, then we do something called fine needle aspiration. You aspirate from the nodule. Better to go for an ultrasound guided aspiration rather than a blind aspiration. And when you get an FNAC report, again, please ask for Bethesda system of classification for the FNAC. Not just a adenomatous goiter, adenomatous nodule. No, they should give it by Bethesda classification. So if the Bethesda classification, again, it has 6 classes. If the class is higher, that means higher chance of malignancy. So whenever there's going to be a thyroid nodule or structural problem, first do an ultrasound, ask for a TIRAD score. If the TIRAD score is high, then you do an FNAC, ultrasound guided, and then depending on the Bethesda score, we will decide whether it needs surgery or not. So my idea is that any structural problem of the thyroid, does not require surgery. Don't go for surgery for every nodule because it's unnecessary. Only for nodules which have a Tirad score which is high, which have a Bethesda classification which is high, then we go for a surgery. So when does one go for thyroid surgery? Is when a person has a nodule more than 4 centimeters, when there is a chance of malignancy, or for cosmetic reasons. So these are the only ways when we go for a thyroid surgery. So summarizing all these things together, my summary for you for today is that iodine cannot be measured for an individual accurately. Please know that. Always test thyroid function first, then evaluate the structure. Thyroid test fasting sample, do TSH and free T4, do it by E-CLIA method, electrochemiluminescence immunoassay method. Thyroid antibodies for Hashimoto's we do TPO antibody, for Graves we do TSH receptor antibody. Nodules need ultrasound and FNAC. Ultrasound asks for Tirad score, FNAC asks for Bethesda classification report. All thyroid nodules don't need surgery. There are indications, specific indications for surgery. Thyrotoxicosis isn't hyperthyroidism. There is a subtle difference. And for those with a pituitary problem or thyrotoxicosis when TSH is suppressed 0.01, we go by free T4 only for changing the doses. We do not go by the TSH value because TSH can be misleading in these conditions. So the opposite of success isn't failing, it is learning. The more we learn about a thing, the more we dive deeper into it, the more the chance of success increases. So that comes to the end of the lecture. Before I finish the lecture, I'm just going to some myths and facts, some quick facts. The thyroid is making you fat. That's a myth. A lot of people come to us saying that because of the thyroid problem, I developed obesity. No, it is not. Because if you had a thyroid disorder and then you replaced it with thyroid medication, within 2 months, whatever fat you got because of thyroid would have become normalized. So whatever is remaining is not because of the thyroid, it is because of your own lifestyle. So your thyroid is not making you fat. Do not use the thyroid just as a punch box, okay? The other myth is you have to stop taking your thyroid medication when you're pregnant. No, thyroid is like a battery to your body. When you need battery for yourself, then if you have one more organism inside you, you need more battery, not less battery. So when you're pregnant, you'll require more thyroid medication if you have hypothyroidism. I won't be able to get pregnant if I am thyroid. We have seen a lot of stories where women think because they have thyroid problem, they do not want to get married. No, it is not such a big problem. Thyroid is a disorder. It is not a disease. A person who is wearing a glass or a specs does not mean that they are blind. Okay. So we are only replacing from what is outside. So once you get it replaced within 2 months, your thyroid function is normal. It is not a hindrance to your fertility. You can't lose weight if you are hypothyroid. Again, not true. If you are hypothyroid and if you are properly replaced, then you are normal like anyone else. If you're not able to lose weight, it's because your mechanism is wrong. You're faulty with the way you're trying to lose weight. So get some expert advice. So finally, we are chasing the wrong rabbit most of the time when it comes to obesity and thyroid. When it comes to thyroid and nodules, we go for surgery. Whenever we are talking about obesity, we think it's because of thyroid. Whenever it's a fertility problem, we think it's because of thyroid. So diving deep and knowing more about the thyroid will help you to come away from these wrong habits and from catching the wrong rabbit as well. Now, taking extra iodine is good for thyroid health. Again, no, you should take only iodine as much as required. If you take more, then that is also a problem. There's something called the George-Basedow effect and so on. So not taking too much is also good. Don't take too much of iodine. What is required is only 150 micrograms per day. And if you have thyroid nodule, you should undergo surgery. Again, a big myth. Please do not go for surgery for all thyroid nodules. Okay. Thyroid nodules are common, around 5% on palpation. And if you do ultrasound, around 60% of normal people have a nodule. Okay. But the risk is usually in the population is less than 5% for thyroid malignancy. So please do not go for surgery for all thyroid nodules unless it has been proved by FNAC. And lastly, one myth is, if you have thyroid, should I avoid ice creams? Where people confuse tonsils with thyroid. It's only for tonsils that you should avoid an ice cream. Or if you have a thyroiditis, a current inflammation of the thyroid with thyroid pain and cough and all, you should avoid ice creams. Does not mean that once you are not having any throat pain, no fever, then you can definitely take ice cream. Thyroid has no effect on the ice cream. It is the tonsil which has an effect on the ice cream. Since both are found in the neck and both start with T, people confuse tonsil with thyroid. So my take home messages for you is that the thyroid problems can be functional or structural. We still do not know the exact reason for both, and both seem multifactorial. And I also want to know what myth about thyroid did you bust today? I hope this class was useful. If you found it useful, yes, you can tag me in your story. This is my Instagram ID, drsaktivel.endo. You can tag me in your story. You can mention in your post, or you can mention my YouTube channel, which is Dr. Sakti's Hormone Diaries. Thanks for having me here. As I said, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But when the student is truly ready, the teacher disappears. Thank you. Thanks once again for this wonderful opportunity. Thanks from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjay, for enlightening us and thought-provoking presentation. We believe that the knowledge you have shared will help us even see in the future. Thank you so much. Now we will call upon Dr. Bharat to give us what of that.
A very good afternoon to one and all. It is a very immense pleasure for myself as well as from the Department of General Medicine to express our heartfelt thanks and gratitude to our speaker, Dr. Shaktivel Subramanian, consultant endocrinologist, for this wonderful webinar on hypothyroidism and sharing this valuable information. I also extend my gratitude to our Dean, Professor Dr. Shanmugam, our Medical Superintendent, Professor Dr. N. Mohan, Vice Principal, Professor Dr. T. Usha, Deputy Medical Superintendent, Professor Dr. Prasanna, for their continuous motivation and guidance for conducting such clinical updates. I must express my profound sense of appreciation and thank all my colleagues from Department of General Medicine, guided by our HOD Professor Dr. S. Ramaswamy and Dr. Kanagaraj, for their hard work they have done to make this webinar a successful one. I'm also very thankful to all the faculty, teaching as well as non-teaching faculty, HODs of other departments, junior residents, CRIs, for your active participation and cooperation for this webinar. Thank you so much.
Any questions? Thank you. Thanks all for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you.